When I retired the first time, I've retired 3 times from the pastorate. Nearly 20 years ago, I was 65 at the time. We stayed in Cass City, and I was out preaching right away. Had a Sunday off, so we went back to our church, Cass City, and one of our married ladies came up. She says, "Pastor, I got to tell you, on the way in the car this morning, your name came up, and our little boy, he was like 4 or 5 years old, he says, 'How long has Pastor Wood been retarded?'" And you laughed, didn't you? She laughed too. I didn't think it was funny. But I've retired 3 times from the pastorate in the last 20 years. When I came on board back in 1973, Michigan had just been saturated with PCBs. Remember when the fire retardant got into the cattle feed and all the cows ate it, and then we ate the meat and we were laced with PCBs. We came right when that had polluted the whole state, just in time to get poisoned. We had been down in Ohio, and that was in the summer of '73. And then the Arab oil embargo was put into effect to raise the price of oil by the Arabs. So President Nixon asked if all of the gas stations would just stay closed on weekends to cut down on our driving. Well, my ministry from Cass City was all over the state, and I needed gas, and I had to go out and bought 2 big 5-gallon gas cans, and I'd fill them up on Saturday, put them in my trunk, and lash them in with bungee cords, so they wouldn't tip over. So I get to where I was going and get home again, because the stations were all closed on Sunday. And that's how we started out. But God blessed in a very wonderful way. I was called to the ministry here in Michigan by the council in May or June of that year. But we didn't want to leave our church down in Ohio until the summer. We had some things going on. We felt we needed to stay. So during those summer months, I got a map of Michigan. I put it on a piece of cardboard, and I got from the council a list of all of our churches. We had 3 divisions of churches. We had MARBC churches. We had GARBC churches. You weren't a member of both automatically. You had to apply for membership at each one. Then we had the Galilean Baptist missions. So I put a pin in every spot in Michigan where we had one of those 3 churches. And the map was just plastered with different colored pins, depending on whether they were MARBC or GARBC and MARBC or Galilean, whatever. And when I started in September, I would lay out a route I lived in Cass City, way over on the right side of the state, on the east side in the thumb, so I was a little off center. And I would make out a 2-day trip, and depending on where the pins were, I'd route myself this way going out and this way coming back, and I would determine to call on these churches on the way out and these churches on the way back, and as I called on them, I'd pull their pin. When the following summer began, I pulled my last pins, and they were all around Muskegon, that area. And I had calling cards, business cards. If a pastor wasn't in when I went there, I left my card, at least he knew I was there. But when I started, we only had enough money to pay me about 1 month's salary. Joe Bauer was the chairman of the council, and he and the council got busy and promoted the ministry of the MARBC to the point where churches immediately began sending in money. They put us on support as a missionary, and I never lost a payday. It was an act of faith on our part, but I never worried about it because I was just so sure God wanted me here, had peace about it, and it proved true. We started a few things that first year that God blessed. The State Teen Bible Conference we began, and also the statewide men's retreat up at Lake Ann. As far as I know, those programs are still going, or should be. But we had a great time, and I finally I ran out of gas. I was gone so long, and so sometimes I'd be gone 8 or 10 days before I got home, and I wouldn't leave the state of Michigan. I stayed in a lot of homes. A lot of pastors put us up. Once in a while, I'd stay in a motel if I couldn't find a home to stay in. It saved the association the cost of putting me up in a motel, and I ate a lot of McDonald's hamburgers. Back in those days, I could get a good meal for $1.25, hamburgers, fries, and a beverage. I laugh at those days now, but we made a lot of friends, but I finally got so road weary I had to give it up. And the Cass City church where we lived, it was my wife's home church, by the way, is where we were married. They became pastorless, and they came around and asked me if I would be willing to be a candidate, and I was. So we got the call to Cass City. We just stayed right in our home. We didn't have to move, and we were there another 10 years. And from that church, I retired at 65. That would be 20 years ago next April. In the meanwhile, back at the ranch, God just kept me so busy. I think I preached more in retirement than I ever did in the pastorate. I'd made a lot of friends in 10 years, all over the state as I was, and it seemed like I just never had a Sunday off. I remember when Pastor Dan Osterhout, you remember Dan down in Oxford? He had a sad situation with his wife. His wife up and left him and went down to Florida, and he wanted to go down and take a leave of absence and win her back. And he called me and asked me if I was now retired from Cass City, and asked me if I would be willing to serve as interim while he was away. Had a wonderful church down there. And I was available, so I went down. They called me as their interim. I was there for 18 months. And every Sunday, I don't believe I missed a Sunday even for a vacation. Maybe I did, I don't remember, but basically I was just there every Sunday. When they finally called a man, they had a little going away party for us, had a Sunday noon potluck dinner, and gave me a Bible as a gift. And I came home that afternoon, and I was now free. Didn't have any responsibilities. It was a nice feeling. I got back into our home in Cass City. I kicked off my shoes, took my coat off, took my tie off, slumped down in my lazy boy chair, and I was free. Free at last, free at last. About 30 minutes later, the pastor down here in Flint, Faith Baptist, called and said, I just resigned and we want you as our interim pastor. So I had 30 minutes. It was like that just month after month. I had 18 months at Chesaning. I followed Joe Bauer at Chesaning. He would only stay 6 months in the ministry, and that may have been the thing I should have done, but he had told them about me, so they called me, and I was there 18 months. Before that, I was 18 months up at Higgins Lake. Then I was 18 months at Cornerstone Baptist in Bay City. These were the longest interims I had, but in the meantime, just little churches here and there for a week or two, sometimes for a month or two, but just preaching, preaching, preaching. I finally ended up in Bay City. I was there for 18 months. They conned me to come out of retirement, and I did. And it was from that church that I retired just a month ago. They would have me stay. In fact, they told me, we'd like to have you until you're 100 years old, Pastor. I never had a church love us so much and so understanding. It's just a terrific congregation. But my wife's health broke. She developed vertigo. It's dizziness. And one day around last of June, 1st of July, she completely blacked out, fell in the kitchen, banged her head awfully hard on the counter. And she was out when she hit the floor. She spent 5 days in intensive care. She had bleeding in the brain, another 12 days in rehab, and she's still in the process of recovering from that. She's still not as strong as she should be or as certain on her feet. She needs a walker. And I realized that I just could not continue pastoring and take care of her, so we retired the third time. And the last Sunday of September, just a month ago, was my third retirement. But I just thank the Lord what he was willing to do for me in retirement. When you're 65, you're kind of over the hill. Not many men, Joe Bauer is an exception to this too. He had 71 years in, but he's older than I, and he's got more miles on his odometer. He started earlier than I did. But for 60 years, I just thank God. Thank God for what we've seen as we look back. When you're my age, it's kind of like climbing a mountain. If you've ever preached on Caleb and his "Give me this mountain," he was 85 years old when he climbed that mountain and took on the biggest giant he could find. That giant was a giant's giant. Read the Bible. He was the biggest of the giants. And he said, "Give me this mountain." And I'll be 85 in December. And you can't help but have a perspective at that age that you don't have when you're younger. It's like being at the top of a mountain, your ministry's behind you now, and you look over what God has done for you, and it just blesses your heart. And I just marvel at the grace of God in my life, not only in saving me, but keeping me busy for so long. I look at Jim Howard and Chuck Richardson, a couple of my assistants at Cass City that served with me and under me for a few years, and how well they're doing, and that's a blessing. And if I may just take the time to share an experience that I had back in Ohio. I inherited, when I went to Ohio, a Diotrephes, a layman who loveth to have the preeminence. He was against all authority figure in the church, not only pastors, but deacons as well. He was quite a Bible teacher and was highly respected, but he was not a friend of leadership. And I wasn't there very long, and he came after me. We had gone down there from Detroit, where we had been for 7 years. We didn't have 2 dimes to rub together when we went down there. We had to buy a house because they had no parsonage, so we took out a double mortgage, so we were heavily in debt. And in our very first year, he developed such an antagonism towards us that I feared that I was going to be run out of church. The deacons meeting the night before, they were concerned about it as well. He had a lot of influence. And the next morning, I went into my study, and I was having my devotions. I always started my days in the Bible and in prayer. And I was asking God to help me. I was scared to death. I was afraid I was going to be run out of town on a rail. And, why me, Lord? What have I done to deserve this? Now, a nice guy like me, he doesn't like me. And I heard a racket over at my window in the office, and it kept going on and on and on, and it distracted me from my prayer. So I remember saying, "Excuse me a minute, Lord," and I got up off my knees and went over to the window. And here was a little moth fluttering up and down nervously, and on the other side of the window, on the outside, was a big old sparrow pecking at it, trying to get it. And this was going up and down, the little moth and the bird trying to get the moth, but that invisible shield was between them. Not a big deal. I interrupted my prayer time to see a bird trying to kill a moth. On my way back to my chair, it hit me. In fact, as I recall, I stopped in mid-stride with my leg up. I turned around, went back, and looked at it again. And suddenly I realized that God was trying to show me something. And I went back to my prayer time, and it was one of the most revolutionary times in my whole ministry. That little moth was as safe as he could be because of that invisible shield. Earlier, when I was at Moody Bible Institute, it's interesting how much, hearing Joe Bauer last night, our lives kind of run together. I too was trained at Moody. I sat at the feet of Dr. Kenneth Wiest, and he in one class period, he said, "I want to tell you guys something about 1 Peter 2:9. For ye are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood." The old King James says, "a peculiar people." And that's not a good translation in our language today. Not peculiar, but unique, our own special people. He said there's a picture that goes with this word, and he went to the blackboard, and he took a chalk, he drew a big circle on the blackboard, and he put a little dot in the middle. He said, now this Greek word has this picture to it. By the way, if you have his 4-volume set of word pictures, he talks about this in his commentary on 1 Peter. And in fact, here's I copied it for you. He says the word peculiar here is used in a way not often seen today. The Greek word means literally to make a round. And that was the big circle he drew. And then he put a dot in the middle of the circle. it means to go around, that is to make something and then to surround it with a circle, thus indicating ownership. The Greek word speaks of the unique, private, personal ownership of the saints by God. Each saint is God's unique possession, just as if that saint were the only human being in existence. He put a dot in the middle of the circle. He said that dot is the believer. And what this word is saying is that when God saves us, he completely surrounds us because we are his peculiar possession. In fact, he says the word means more than just to surround, it means to encapsulate. It's like putting a pea or a bean inside a tennis ball. And then he drew an X on the outside of the circle. He said, now the X is the devil. He says, what this word is teaching us is that before the devil outside the circle can get to the dot, the believer inside the circle, he must always pass through God and have God's permission. I had never heard that before. No one ever told me that. I was saved when I was 10. I was saved after hearing Dr. Harry Ironside, whom Joe mentioned last night. I was saved under his preaching and at the age of 10. But I'd never heard that before. I almost floated out of the classroom that day, just thinking that God surrounds me and encapsulates me. But this is the truth all through the Bible. When the devil went to God to test Job, he could not put a finger on Job until God gave the devil permission. And what was the devil's complaint? You would put a hedge about him. Simon, Jesus said to him, Satan hath desired to have you, that he may sift you as wheat, but I prayed for you. And when Jesus talks about our eternal security in John 10, my sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me, and I give unto them eternal life, and they shall never perish, neither shall any man pluck them out of my hand. Not from off his hand, but out of my hand. If we can't be taken out of his hand, it's because we're down in his hand. This is the picture. And then in case some Arminian didn't get the picture of it, he says, my Father who gave them me is greater than all, and no man shall pluck them out of my Father's hand. And that's encapsulation. And when I went back to my chair after watching that bird at the window, I remembered that, what Weiss had taught that day. I knew it, but I never applied it. And I thank God for the promise. I'm getting a little choked up here, but it was a very emotional experience for me. That was 50 years ago. 60 years later, I was still preaching. They never laid a pinky on me. Now I understand 1 Corinthians 10:13. There hath no temptation taken you, but such as is common to man, but God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tested above what ye are able, but will with the testing also provide a way of escape, that ye may be able to bear it. That's the promise, and it's true. And I just thank God for his grace and his provision and his protection. And 60 years later, I was still pastoring one of the finest congregations I ever had. Cornerstone Baptist Church was a unique church, and they loved us, and we loved them. And if it wasn't for my wife's health breaking down, why, one of the members said, we want you here, Pastor, till you're 100 years old. I said, I don't think my vitamins will last that long, you know. But when Jean fell and hurt her head and all, I realized that I couldn't continue pastoring, do justice to the job, and take care of her. But I just want to tell you, at 85, I look back from my mountain, and I just see the blessings of God, the honor that has been bestowed on me to serve him this long, the fact that he would allow me the privilege of serving until I'll be 85 in December. And it just overwhelms me. I thank God every day for putting me in the ministry. Years ago, as a young pastor, I was reading something about Gypsy Smith. So you've heard of Gypsy. I heard him preach when I was a boy growing up in Chicago. He was still alive back in the 40s and 50s. And they tell how when he was in his 80s, he was still preaching and enthusiastically. And he always wanted the song service to be short so he could get up and preach. He's just that kind of a guy. And somebody asked him one time, said, Gypsy, how do you do it? You've been preaching all over the world for all your lifetime. You were saved as a little boy, and so enthusiastic and ready to go and gung-ho for God. How do you do it? I never forgot his answer. He said, I've never lost the wonder. And I remember as a young preacher closing my eyes, bowing my head, and say, Lord, I never want to lose the wonder of my salvation. I want to thrill to it every day. Not have I gotten what I received. Grace hath bestowed it since I have believed. Boasting excluded, pride I abase. I'm only a sinner saved by grace. Once I was foolish and sin ruled my heart, causing my footsteps from God to depart. But Jesus has found me. Happy my case. I now am a sinner saved by grace. So suffer a sinner whose heart overflows with love for his Savior to tell what he knows. Once more to tell it would I embrace. I'm only a sinner saved by grace. I would leave you with this verse to hang your hat on. You can take this to the bank. Therefore be ye steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, for you know that your labor is not in vain in the Lord. 1 Corinthians 15:58. Thank you, Ken.